Well, hello, everybody. This is Zeus Kerravala from ZK Research here for another ZKast video podcast series. And I'm here along with my co-host, Mark Reed Edwards. Mark, why don't you say hi?
Hey, I just want to make you know that I am not a pig.
And I'm not a feline here. So in honor of the lawyer that made this gap, we'll talk about that later, we decided we'd start this off with a couple of video filters to be funny. As always, this video podcast is done in conjunction with my media partner, eWEEK. So I hope you're all having a good eWEEK. And Mark, we had kind of a big week as far as we had some earnings, we had some news. There was lots of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, so do you want to start off with Cisco earnings?
Yeah, so Cisco earnings is always kind of important, certainly much more so than the smaller players because they are still a bellwether for the industry. And really, it's interesting how many, smaller network and communication vendors there are that they're always following Cisco's earnings well because really as they go, so goes the industry. It's not like they're gaining, they have so much share in so many markets that they're really driven a lot by market now. So if you look at the numbers, they weren't bad. They weren't great. I think given sort of the economic climate that we're in, we just had a change of, of presidents. We're still kind of in the midst of this pandemic. They reported a modest second quarter beat. So they reported numbers 11.96 billion. The street was expecting 11.925. So that was a $35 million beat. It's a very slight beat considering how big that number is. It was a slight decline year over year. We're talking like less than 1%, less than 0.5%, I believe. Actually, the earnings were 3 cents a share. That was up about 3% year over year. One of the impressive numbers actually was that the gross margin was almost 67%. And this is that's their highest number in over a decade. That's a number that's been creeping up. I remember before Chuck Robbins became president, they did have, CEO. They did have a quarter, although I'd vote for him as president probably. They did have a quarter where the gross margin dropped below 60%, and Wall Street acted like the sky was falling. So they've slowly gotten that number back up, and it's 66.9%. From a product perspective, management called out strength in security. That was the star of the show, up 10% year over year. And you would expect that with the pandemic going on. WebEx was another good performer. And again, that's something you'd expect as well. The new Cat 9Ks, the new Nexuses, the new Meraki Wi-Fi, or all the Meraki Wi-Fi. Those are all things you would expect. Now, on the downside, it's things that go into corporate offices, right? So that's not really a big surprise. Products like their data center products, their routing, the traditional UCIP, which is IP telephony, right? The on-premise systems, those were down, and that's really in line with a lot of the channel checks that I've done. I think if you look at just their business across different sectors, they had strength in public sector and service provider. The enterprise continued to be a laggard, and again, that's not expected given where we are with the pandemic. From a business model perspective, here's where I was really encouraged. The company continues to make strong progress in its shift to software and subscription revenue. Total software revenue, this is the first time they actually closed that, was about 3.6 billion, 76% of which came from subscription. So that's an impressive number, right? That much of it's shifted to subscription. I think the company is also in a good position as far as a lot of the upcoming trends that we see. In the network side, Wi-Fi 6 is coming, 5G is coming, 400 gig is coming. The integration of network and security, as we talked about last week, is happening. So those are all strengths. I think one of the interesting transitions to watch over the next year as the vaccine gets rolled out is, do people go back to the office? A couple of quarters ago, Chuck Robbins, their CEO, was on Cramer, and Jim Cramer, not Cosmo Cramer, and he had said that people aren't going back to the office, but they make stuff that go into corporate offices, and they have to adjust their business. Now, this week, he said that it was a bit of a different tune. He said a lot of the customers, and this is consistent with what I've heard back, is people like to work from home when it's an option. Mm-hmm. They don't want to always be forced to work from home. And I have picked that up, too, in a lot of the checks I've done with companies, is more and more, I think there is a thirst to go back to work. I've talked to a lot of people that they're dying to have some social interaction. And I think this mass kind of, everyone expected that every city would be completely vacated with people and no one would ever go into office buildings anymore, is largely overblown. I think when we're allowed to, we are going to go back. I don't think you're going to see people ever go back, well, not for a long time, for 5 days a week. But I know I've talked to business leaders that are looking 2, 3, 4 days a week. They'll have people in, have the freedom to work from home on a Monday or Friday, stretch your weekend out, that sort of thing. We've proven we can be just as productive at home as we can in the office, but now people need that flexibility. So, I do think that Cisco's business, although it's been kind of lagging a little because of the pandemic, will get a boost once the global recovery starts. There's an awful lot of pent-up demand for on-prem infrastructure. If you think of just the stuff that we've shifted to the network, we're doing more video, we're doing more collaboration, we're doing more cloud. That puts a lot of pressure on the networks that are in place. And so again, this, the 400 gig, 5G, Wi-Fi 6E, these are all, strong transitions that help Cisco out. So I think while we're seeing the company kind of go through, they're kind of hovering along as the pandemic goes. I am expecting boosts, and I think investors are as well. The stock's been acting pretty nice as well. So, and they just upped their dividend, and so it's I think from an earnings perspective, it was about as good as we could expected. But I think the back half of the calendar year, which should actually be the first half of their next fiscal year, should look pretty good, because I think by then, hopefully, we'll have managed the vaccine rollout somewhat okay, and we'll start seeing people go back. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Salesforce said that they wouldn't be having people, they're making it optional for people. I mean, they spend a lot of money on their new tower in San Francisco. So if that winds up being largely empty, that's going to be kind of interesting to see what they do with their real estate. But I do think that the longer we stay out of the office, the more we want to go back. And this will probably ebb and go in cycles. I think people will work from home more in the summer when the kids are home, and in the winters when it's cold, and then the spring and fall. When it's nice, cities, they will.
Yeah. How about Masergy? Speaking of Cisco, they launched a Cisco UCaaS offering. You
may look at this and go, it's not that interesting. They just partnered with Cisco like lots of other companies do. But Masergy does bring a lot of kind of unique attributes to the table here. So while there are a lot of ways to buy WebEx if you're a customer, and Masergy is an SD-WAN provider and SASE provider, a managed service provider. And I think more and more we're going to start seeing this coming together of UC or UCaaS and SD-WAN. In fact, about 3/4 of the deployments that I see of customers moving to SD-WAN, there's a UCaaS component of it driving it. So, and it makes sense when you think of traditional collaboration technology that I deploy on-prem. I'm highly reliant on my WAN to distribute voice over IP calls and video calls between my branch locations. Once I move it to the cloud, right, now all of a sudden my traffic patterns change. So I need a different kind of a network. And so that's where the shift to SD-WAN comes into play. I think Masergy, unlike a lot of SD-WAN providers, they're a white glove managed service provider. They've got a lot of experience. And the thing with SD-WAN and SASE that I think people don't realize sometimes is it's a lot more complicated than traditional WANs. Now, the benefits you get, increased agility, cost savings outweigh the complexity, but you do have to think of a lot of things like, where do I want to keep, how do I migrate from my local infrastructure? Do I want to keep some there? Do I want to put everything in the cloud? What are the traffic patterns look like, right? And so there's a lot of decisions to make, and I think that's where Masergy's strengths really are. But I think the real core strength of Masergy, though, is their network. I first got introduced to Masergy, Mark, my first year at Yankee Group. That's how long they go back, and they built
back in the dark ages.
In the dark ages, yeah, 2000. They were founded in 2000, but they built their network from the ground up specifically for real-time traffic, voice and video. In fact, the first killer app on their network was Cisco Telepresence, if you remember that. And so a lot of service providers, their networks are built on like old frame networks and ATM networks that they've layered ATM on top. AT&T's network is built that way, right? Masergy was built from the ground up with the real-time traffic in mind. So they have a layered L2, L3 core. They run VPLS, MPLS over this network, and that's why they get 1 millisecond jitter across their entire network, even in Asia. So you could almost think that when they built their network, they were a solution looking for a problem. And that problem they thought was telepresence, but that didn't really take off like we all thought it would, right? And but I think that problem has finally come to Masergy. And today that's, we really have ubiquitous video, with the use of, WebEx and tools like that all over the place. So what Masergy is offering now is they did have an older BroadSoft offering in which they offered their own voice service plus their own branded collaboration tool. So now you buy WebEx with their calling infrastructure, and you can buy their SD-WAN as well. And so I think that kind of ability to tie the two together through one management console makes a lot of sense. And so it's a good announcement for Masergy. More and more, we're going to see this combination of UCaaS and SD-WAN tied together.
So we talked a lot about video, but one of the things with digital transformation that has really been forced over the last year or so is how do you move all your legacy content into digital form? And Box has upgraded its Shuttle service. Can you tell us about that?
This is really the first major update to Shuttle since they launched it in 2016. Some of it is they just changed the pricing a little bit to be more competitive with the free offerings out there that you get from Microsoft and Google. And the one thing I will say about free is free sometimes gets very expensive once you start digging into it, because you don't get a lot of the bells and whistles that you would, and so you wind up having. And that's certainly the case with most. When you think of Microsoft and most things that they say are free, right? You don't get what you don't pay for. And so you wind up paying for that later in different formats. But Box Shuttle is a content migration service that helps customers migrate large volumes of content and policies and things like that from Drive, from SharePoint, from OneDrive, from on-premises systems up into the Box cloud. This isn't just a file copy. Okay, I want to express to people watching this how difficult this process is. Content is everything, right? And businesses have content scattered all over the place. I mean, we weren't that big a company, Yankee, and think how. I mean, man, we had content. Who knew how to control the content there, right? And so, I think what Box Shuttle does is it's the migration service tied to a lot of professional services that allows companies to migrate that content, modify permissions during that migration. Box said, told me that it allows for critical restructuring of that content without any downtime at all. So it's not like people have to wait for the content before they can start working it. They have good management tools to help you visualize where it is. They've got AI tools as well to help you understand where your content is and how it can be stored better. And I think they do a nice job of tying the content together. In fact, I've talked to Microsoft users, and I just wrote this post on eWEEK, so maybe include a link here to it, as comparing Box to OneDrive and Google, where they're actually able to create one content store for SharePoint and Teams and OneDrive, where if you think about the traditional Microsoft way, those are separate silos, right? So the Box has been that underlying infrastructure that ties it all together, and the Shuttle service is that first step in getting that migration there. I think the updates to Box Shuttle really highlight the company's evolution away from being a simple cloud storage company, which is the way a lot of people think about Box, to a full provider of enterprise content management. Last September, I think it was, they announced a whole bunch of updates to its content, aimed at helping enterprises do more with their content. Earlier this month, I think it was just last week, they announced plans to acquire an e-signature company as well, that would help them in that regard. So Box, while most people think of it as cloud content or cloud storage, is much more than that today. And I think Shuttle really underscores how much this company's changed.
All right, so let's talk about Zoomcats. It was one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time, and it kind of at the 11th month of the pandemic, to see someone still unable to figure out Zoom was kind of entertaining.
Well, I chuckled over that as well, but it does kind of show you, Mark, that these systems do have a long way to go as far as AI features go, and how these things should evolve. Like this is something where even through a voice interface, you think that the lawyer would be able to say, "Turn off my filter," something like that, right? That was kind of an embarrassing situation for that. It also underscores, I think, the value of not Zoom or WebEx or whatever as a platform, but you actually take this, componentize it, and then build it into other applications. So for instance, Cisco built a custom version of WebEx called Cisco Legislate, which was WebEx for legislatures, in which it's built into the application they already use. And I think when you look at the evolution of this space, that's the direction we're headed in, is these things that we use today are okay for meetings like this. But if I'm a school teacher, I want it built into the education application. If I'm a doctor, I want to build into my healthcare application. If I'm a lawyer and I'm talking to a courtroom, I shouldn't be using stock Zoom. I should have a special kind of courthouse type application where, all those things are the things you don't need are filtered out, because it's a little, pardon the pun, because it is a little weird that those things are available in a feature that's being used, in a version that's being used in a court. But, so stock Zoom is good for a lot of things, but moving forward, I think we need to think about how these things become more platforms, and we use the features of Zoom or the features of WebEx or Avaya Spaces or something like that to build it into other applications.
They all have APIs, I would assume, and they just should be able to plug into other apps fairly easily.
Yeah, some are better than others. I was just talking with Avaya about this actually a couple hours ago, where they built their platform on their CPaaS, on their API backend. So for them to do it's fairly easy, right? So this is actually, we're gonna, over the next few years, we're gonna see how these products evolve, because I do think shifting these things to, and in fact, it's an important part of growth, Mark. If you think of every big software company that's ever been, they've all made the transition from product to platform. And I think this is the next evolutionary step for this industry, as well as AI features like that. That is something that you should be able to turn off, pretty easily. But the fact that the lawyer couldn't underscores that while these things are easy for most people, it's not easy for everybody. Right?
Yeah, well, to change that stuff, you've got to look down at the bottom, and I'm on a Mac right now, and you have to wait for the menu to appear, and then you click on something, you click on to backgrounds and filter. It's a little more complicated than it should be. It probably should be right there on some kind of, menu bar down at the bottom all the time, so that you know what's available and what's not.
Yeah, I actually, and in full disclosure, Mark and I were sort of goofing around before we started this. I didn't actually know where those filters were. I had to actually go. I didn't realize it was the same place as virtual backgrounds.
Yeah,
and I'd never used them before. So if it had just been on, in an application where I was talking to a customer, it would have taken me a couple of seconds to turn around and figure out how to use it. And trust me, I know a lot of lawyers. They're not the most tech savvy people. So I could see how that would happen.
Yeah. They still send out paper, right? So,
yeah.
How about the Super Bowl? You and I kind of had some predictions. I thought it was going to be a close game, but Tom Brady was going to win. And a couple of times you said the old guy is going to win, and whoever has the ball last is going to win. Essentially, we were both right.
Kind of. It wasn't as close. I don't think anybody expected blowout. I will say the one thing it showed, though, is what an amazing quarterback Patrick Mahomes is. Some of those, he was running for life. I mean, I don't ever remember a Super Bowl like that, where when the 49ers played the Broncos, where a quarterback was under that much pressure the entire game. And that one of the passes he threw at the end, where he was like horizontal, like he was in the air. This was even the helmet. The guy should have caught that ball. So I think, like Giselle said about Tom once, he can't throw the ball and catch the ball. I think we can make the same argument for Patrick Mahomes. I think he really played even though they didn't score any touchdowns, he played just a tremendous game. And what can you say about Tom Brady? I thought he would come into this game completely focused. I think this Super Bowl, he won't admit this ever, but I think this Super Bowl meant more to him than any Super Bowl ever, except for maybe the first one. And so, I think he was so hyper focused on winning this game, he wasn't going to let this team lose. So it's interesting that one of the Boston sports media, I think it was the Hub, put up a story about how there maybe has never been an athlete more important to his team than Tom Brady has been to the teams he's played on. So the Patriot way, as we used to say, is go out and have the best quarterback of all time. So we'll see if the Pats can rebuild from here, but it's pretty easy to win when you've got a guy like him.
Yeah, one stat that I saw is that Tom Brady ran something like 35 yards the whole game, and Patrick Mahomes ran 400 and something yards.
Yeah, yeah, and Tom's very efficient with way. I mean, he doesn't have the legs that Patrick Mahomes does either.
Yeah,
Right? So
yeah.
I think Mahomes is going to be here for a long time. Is he ever going to become a 7-time Super Bowl champion? I'm not sure. In your or my lifetime, if we'll ever see that again. So
Yeah, yeah,
this is an achievement for the ages. So. And I
definitely.
almost was, when you think about like the old Boston Celtics, where Bill Russell, I think, went 11,
Yeah.
those are pretty amazing stats, right? These are generational things that I think, in the midst of it, we don't appreciate until they're gone. So
Yeah. And it's also the era of level playing field, literally,
yeah,
in football. And to have that kind of success where you've been in 18% of all the Super Bowls. It's an amazing statistic.
yeah, it is. He's the, um, I was a big Joe Montana fan, so a lot. I didn't really want to admit he was the GOAT for a long time, but I don't know. Although if you look at Jerry Rice, his stats are so far above the number 2 receiver, you can make an argument for him being
Mhm.
the best football player ever. But Brady, no one's controlled a game like Tom Brady.
Yeah.
So, anyways, so that brings us. I think we'll close it up here, and at least we got our predictions right, kind of. So, on behalf of Mark Reed Edwards and myself, I'm Zeus Kerravala from ZK Research, and my partner eWEEK, saying have a great rest of your week. Thanks.